Hello! This week's video I'm actually really excited about because we are going to be chopping up and doing takeaways and excerpts from my most recent panel talk at CMX. And this is kind of special for me. It's all about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I was joined by Nikiya and by Abbiola, and we were all interviewed by Crystal Beecham in Redwood, California. The three approaches that each of us took were wildly different because they differed based upon the scope that you were acting in. So for me, it was all about creating exclusive small groups in order to create infrastructural change on a larger scale. Nikiya took that a little bit further and said, all right, you need to make this infrastructural change. How are you going to go about doing that? And Abbiola said, here's how to make this not just a project, but a daily active verb within your online communities in order to make diversity, equity, and inclusion a daily journey. If you want to watch the entire video, you can pop up into this information card right here or into the description. But most importantly, the best thing that you can do to implement on this DEI conversation now is to subscribe down below and share the video with your friends and colleagues and have a discussion about what it really means to implement diversity, equity, and inclusion in your communities. One last thing before we do get involved, I also want to let you know that we are going to be carrying on the conversation. So if you like what you see in these shorts and you watched the entire video for CMX, please by all means join us in the Discord down below, because in November, in the beginning of November, we are actually going to meet again, Nikiya, Abbiola, Crystal, and I, in order to have this discussion. And we're going to practice what we preach. We're actually going to build an entire conversation around implementing on this talk. So if you're really interested in that, hop into the Discord down below, subscribe to this video, and share it with your friends and family in order to start a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'll see you in the comments below.
Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone got their coffee. We are going to be talking about diversity, and again, so happy for Venia, Nikiya, Abbiola to join us in how to continue to grow safe spaces for your community. We are going to go straight into Venia. So can you tell me a little bit about who you are, how you got here, and we'll start with that.
Sure. So I went a bit overboard, and I created a YouTube channel. And I placed my entire transition online for the world to see. And before I knew it, on YouTube, there's this huge queer community that's been built specifically around people who are not out yet, people who are closeted, who are questioning, who are in under-resourced areas, and who are stealth-based. And I ended up with 4,400 of these people asking me for resources and help to live their lives authentically, but they also did not want to be outed online. How can I cater to safety, security, and anonymity while also proving that they exist in order for nonprofits to fund the grants to get their resources? So I help build support groups, and a large majority of my framework comes from the concept of building those support groups in ways that don't infringe upon that safety, security, and anonymity. So the way that I phrase it on my end is exclusivity breeds inclusivity. Don't expand your programs because it will harm the safe spaces you've built. Instead, diversify. You've created something successful. Now move over to another section and then create something else just as successful using what you've learned from the first go. As said before, the exclusivity breeds inclusivity factor is really, really important for me because it allows you to maintain a series of small groups, the unit of transformation in a community infrastructure. And it's that small group element where you create a membrane or a boundary for people to step into that space and say, I am identifying here, and then they create a sense of camaraderie. Let's create another small group, another interface where you can create that camaraderie again, but this time for a different identity. So trans women and trans men have completely different experiences, and placing them both into the same group. Are they trans? Yes. Do they have shared commonalities? 100%. But their difficulties and their struggles are different.
Nikiya, you are currently at Open Space, and just want to learn, again, how you got here, and then also Well, let's talk a little bit about your framework as well.
Well, hi everyone. I'm head of community at OpenSpace, which is a construction technology company that is based in San Francisco. And prior to joining OpenSpace, my previous career was actually as an engineer in the construction industry for almost a decade, a space for construction professionals to connect, learn, and innovate. And so for today in this panel, I will be sharing a framework for how to approach building diversity in any community, regardless of industry, size of community, or even the experience level of the community builder.
I read through your framework and I think it is chef's kiss.
I kind of broke it down into, so there are 4 steps, but I broke it down with the first 2 steps, internal work, the foundational work you have to do first, before you can get to the external work with the final 2 steps. And so first step is self. As community leaders and builders, you really can't start on this diversity journey without bringing your authentic self to work. But then it wasn't until I was faced with, I have to build this community, that I realized I actually was not navigating them properly. I was separating myself into 2 different versions. We're asking so much from our community members. We want them to be authentic, engage with us in the community in the most authentic way possible. And so we have to be able to bring that same level of authenticity and set the tone to be welcoming in our own communities. From there, we all know community is a team sport. We can't do it alone. We have to bring in marketing, product, CS, support, sales, right? And so as community leaders, it's on us to set that tone for our internal team, that it's our team's responsibility to implement community programs, tools with that diversity lens. When you look at each of these one by one, they may seem surface level and performative, but it's in the consistency of doing all of them together on top of your big picture strategy that also incorporates diversity. That's how you create that welcoming, all-inclusive environment that you want. Transitioning to the external. Foster a deep understanding of the industry you're building your community in, right? Whether it's research, interviews, firsthand experience, understand what the different layers and definitions of diversity are in your own industry. What are the most impactful and important ones to take on? Increasing the number of women in construction or people of color in leadership positions. So you have to account for all of those and the intersectionalities of that diversity to make sure you don't miss out on these underrepresented groups. And finally, to end, members, right? We started with the individual self, internal, and we end with the individuals who are the community members in our community. We need to actively seek out these individuals within the underrepresented groups, know to listen, to learn from them, be ready to take their needs and incorporate that in your community development. They need to be targeted, they need to be active. Because especially when you're in an industry like construction, where it's dominated by a certain majority group, if you let your community just grow organically, it'll end up being just a smaller subset of that industry. We need to be able to orchestrate the balance of these ecosystems to keep them thriving, which means this process is iterative. It's something you keep going to keep your community alive so that you just keep increasing and improving that diversity that you have in your community.
And Abbiola, we're going to go to you. And again, tell me about who you are, how you got here, and then we'll also walk through your framework as well.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Abbiola Ballah, coming here from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. I am the founder of Friend Education Studios, and we are a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultancy. So basically, I founded Friend Education Studios in order to be a catalyst for change within the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, prioritizing not just learning, but also taking action. I've been an educator for the past, throughout my career, throughout my work, diversity, equity, and inclusion has always been the through line. That idea of it being something that needs to be assessed and iterated upon as you do this work. So I see building inclusion as something that starts with relationships. That understanding comes through intersectionality. And for those of you who don't know, intersectionality is a term that was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw back in 1989. And it really looks at the social identities of the human being and how they overlap and intersect and interact with each other, especially those identities that are marginalized. So my intersectional identities, and this is what I walk into every space with. I can't leave, right? So I am a cisgender, heterosexual woman of color. I was born and raised in the Caribbean, but I spent 20 plus years outside, of the Caribbean. I am educated. I speak 3 languages. I also walk the world in a larger body. And I have some neurodivergence, and that shows up in, like, I forget words. All of these things make up who I am. And when I walk into a space, I am bringing all of that with me. When we approach inclusion, we approach it through that lens of intersectionality, and not through a lens of it being about one thing. It's not just about race. It's not just about gender. It's not just about sexual orientation. It's about the intersectional identities of that person. How am I going to make sure that all of them feel like they belong? That is absolutely impossible. What am I going to do? And then the frantic and the overwhelm and the frustration starts, and you can see you can get it, right? Okay, inclusion is not something that's a checklist. It's not cut and dried. It's not one and done. And also, belonging is also not something that takes place in a bubble, and it's also not just one person's responsibility, there we go, in order to make sure everyone feels that they belong. Inclusion is not the goal. It is a journey, which means that that journey is not linear. It's actually something that's a cycle, right? And it starts with that awareness and learning, goes into action, and continues with that persistence, right? That persistence is when you assess and iterate on that action, and you learn again, and now you have more awareness and more learning and action, and it keeps going and going and going. Thank you.
So now that we've gone through all of your frameworks, how can our attendees incorporate it into their work, into their communities, into their niches? So we'll start with you, Venia.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to incorporate a notion of exclusivity breeding inclusivity. There are some advantages and some drawbacks to the genuine approach, and it's those drawbacks that you want to look at and converse and discuss with the people who are a part of your programs. The problem, though, is that a lot of that tends to be, oh, we have a problem in our program. That's not necessarily the case. You simply have a lot of assets and superpowers in the users who are within your program that could be shuffled around and provided in a better space. And maybe someone's superpower is being leveraged way too much, especially when it comes to super users. The easiest way to implement that, again, especially with this particular approach, is to focus on the small group. Your small group is going to be the unit of change for your program. And it's that notion of small group discussion and that notion of coming to them in order to take care of those problems and maintaining an asset-based viewpoint that you can use in order to implement this notion of exclusivity breeding inclusivity.
It's all how it comes together, right? I would say, I have my framework, but I learned a lot. We have a lot of intersections with what we discussed.
Yeah.
For me, my approach to implementation here is always aligning it with what the company goals are. Again, bridging that personal and professional self, right? And for my personal goals, I'm very tied to women in construction, right, from my experience. As an example, we have blog posts every month that feature our top users. So for me, I set it as a personal goal that, hey, let's try to feature at least one woman per quarter. What does Open Space care about? They want to bring on an event consultant who will bring a super memorable experience for our community. So again, I lined it up with their value props, right? So they cared about that. I brought it up with this event consultant can really pull off an amazing event for the construction community. Regardless of what framework I choose, what it is that I approach diversity with, I want to make sure I line it up with the company that I'm working for so that it's more of a team, again, a team experience of getting to diversity instead of me just kind of doing it on my own.
Step away from what I call the grand gesture syndrome. So to give you an example really quickly, I had a client who came to me and they wanted to, you know, they had a community and it was for youth, and they had a bunch of workbooks for these youth, and they wanted to audit all of these workbooks. I think like 50 workbooks, 100 to 200 pages each, and they wanted to audit all of them within like 6 months. Are you going to be able to commit to doing this? If you aren't able to commit to that action, then what is the point? Why don't we start with one book? Audit that one book, and that small action, you will see how much of a big change that it will make. Remember, when you are looking at inclusion within your communities, small actions can create big changes.
Thank you for being here, but also thank you for allowing me to be your moderator. And it has been a pleasure interviewing you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal.